Welcome back to the Local Business Report. I'm Marty Collins, and with us today is Brent Rasmussen, Vice President of Western Reporting. Good morning, Brent.
Good morning, Marty. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for joining our program. I know that you're very busy, and so we appreciate you taking time. Today we want to talk about the Fair Housing Act put out by HUD. Can you give us a brief overview of what that is and why it's so important to our viewers?
So the Fair Housing Act itself was put in place years ago, I believe back in the 60s. But more recently, there are some guidelines that have come out by HUD, which is the Housing and Urban Development Group out of the federal government. That's the group that sets the policies for housing, for government subsidy, and it's the group that most of the industry in any type of housing follows to try and establish processes and practices for fair housing.
So across the board, Brent, you're mentioning that covers, does that cover tenants mostly, or does that cover the property owners, property managers? Can you tell me how those two fit together?
So essentially the act itself, it sets up some processes to make sure that a tenant is not unfairly discriminated against, whether it's a class of person, a religion, a sex, an age, or any type of group. The fair housing tries to establish processes that the owner or the management company uses in relationship with the tenant to make sure that no one is unfairly discriminated against, or a new buzz term out there is called disparate impact.
And can you tell me a little bit more? We hear that term kind of buzzing around the industry and around background checks. What exactly does that mean, disparate impact?
So disparate impact means that when you have a relationship with someone, you're going to have some kind of impact on them. And disparate means an impact that is not fair because you're a type of class of person. So for example, many minorities have a higher arrest record than other minorities or than other people. And so if you treat that class or make a ruling in your decisions based on arrest records or based on criminal activity, you may unfairly discriminate against someone who belongs to that class but doesn't necessarily have that criminal activity. And so the concept of working with disparate impact is to make sure that you look more at individuals and who they are and what their history has been, as opposed to putting blanket rulings in place saying, now I will no longer accept someone who has a felony, for example.
I see. That makes a lot of sense, especially in the world that we live in today. It's becoming, everybody seems to be under the microscope a little bit more when it comes to discrimination and civil rights, that sort of thing. But I noticed that one of the things we talked about before we began our interview this morning was a recent ruling put out by HUD as of the first part of April. Can you tell us a little bit about those new rulings and where the focus is now?
The new ruling has several pieces in it. The biggest one that most people paid attention to was the fact that the new ruling indicates that that disparate impact could happen if you were to make a housing decision based on arrest records. Naturally, a person may be arrested but may not be convicted, so you may be unfairly mistreating them until you find out whether they are or are not convicted. So that's one of the biggest topics in the new ruling. They went on to identify 3 or 4 other things that owners or managers have to be aware of to try and make sure that fair housing is implemented. But the biggest one deals with not using arrest records.
Okay, so let's say I'm a property owner or property manager, and I'm aware of this new ruling. What are some of the things I might do differently now than I might have done, say, a month ago?
So first of all, in the reports that you receive, it would be important for you to receive a report that has detail in it. There are companies out there that are not compliant that will simply give you a pass or a fail or give you a slimmed down report. And those reports don't have enough information in for you to prove that you really personally evaluated this report rather than just went on a blanket decision. So the first thing is to get a report from a company that is fully compliant, that gives you detail rather than an instant report.
That makes total sense. I guess it's also a good measure because as these things change, I know property owners may not always be aware of them, but I suspect if there ever comes a case where it's litigated that ignorance is not going to be accepted just because you didn't know when you should have known. That's not going to hold much weight, is it?
That's correct. The courts have begun to set precedents that, like you say, they say if you should have known, you could have known, and therefore you're probably liable. So the other thing that people should do is they should actually establish a process. And that process should be used each and every time so that they're not showing that they treat one person one way and another different. The process rules in their favor if a claim is made against them.
Well, it's good to know that a company like yours, Western Reporting, and by the way, I should mention you're the leading authority in background checks, criminal checks, and credit checks in the nation. It's good to kind of know that you guys are out there on top of this because I could see a lot of property owners saying, how am I supposed to know about this, or how is this even going to be on my radar? But if they're using your reporting systems, they know that they're in compliance and that you're in compliance and that you're watching their back. That's got to give a lot of our viewers and a lot of your clients a lot of peace of mind.
Thank you. Yes, we believe that's a provider's responsibility, is to help protect their customers and clients from mistakenly violating any of these guidelines.
So you mentioned that we should, as property owners, be concerned about getting more comprehensive reporting, which is something that you mentioned you guys do. What else is there, Brent, that we might be missing or that we should be doing different or the property owners should be doing different as they move forward?
Well, specifically, there's a couple of things. Number one, the guidelines indicate that you should look at the severity of the report, that you should look at reports individually, even though it's included in your process, because rather than simply saying a blanket statement, I won't accept felonies or I won't accept misdemeanors, there could be some felonies or misdemeanors that have nothing to do with the housing business, which brings us to the next point, which is you need to actually review for applicability to the business. For example, vehicular homicide, as serious a crime as it is, it's virtually an accident, and it has nothing to do with whether that person would or would not be a proper tenant. So those types of cases should be taken under review, where something like a sex offender, someone who commits a crime against person or property, physical violence, those are the types that would be accepted as applicable and ones that you can make a decision on.
Well, that's certainly important to know, and I can see how property owners might want to be educated and have you guys on their side. Now, how easy is it for a new property owner or property manager to start this process, one, Brent, and two, once it's implemented on an ongoing basis, use it? Is it a fairly simple process?
Well, it didn't used to be. There used to be mountains of paper that you had to fill out. But the processes are not intended to be onerous. And so we've got them streamlined to the point where a little bit of paperwork is required because it's an FCRA requirement. But typically an account can be set up within about 24 hours and you can be running reports within that time frame.
Oh, that is awesome to know. Sure makes that kind of process a lot more comforting. What else are we missing, Brent, or what are some final tips that you might give our viewers today in regards to the Fair Housing Act and this new ruling that just came out?
Some of the other things that have been in place that owners and managers have not done that we would recommend is make sure your provider gives you the capability of delivering adverse action letters, for example. It is a regulation and a guideline that if you're going to deny someone, that you need to send them a formal document and that indicates that you're denying them. You also need to be able to produce a report if the customer wants a copy of the report. If they feel there's an error and want to dispute it, they have to have that capability. And so therefore, either you or your provider need to be able to provide that. And of course, we think it's always best to make it easy for our management company. Let us provide that report and let us answer any questions and teach them how to dispute it, so that the leasing agent or the property manager doesn't have to waste their time doing those kinds of things.
Well, that certainly makes sense. And as Western Reporting, as a major provider out there in this country, it's comforting to know that you guys cover that kind of thing so that the property manager can do what they do best, take care of the properties and take care of their tenants, on the ground, so to speak. Brent, thank you very much for spending time with us today. It's been a pleasure. It's always nice to have you on our program. For the viewers out there, if you'd like to learn more about the Fair Housing Act or the reporting process and get involved with Western Reporting, you can go to their website. You can see it on the screen there. It's westernreporting.com, or you can call them on their phone, and the phone number is 855-910-8443. And we encourage everybody to pick up the phone, make a phone call. It's easy, as Brent mentioned. Take a chance, and you won't be sorry. They're the best reporting and compliance partner to have in this business. Thanks again, Brent, for your time today. We always appreciate having you on the program.
Thank you, Marty. We appreciate being here.
Okay, thank you again. And this is Marty Collins with the Local Business Report, and we'll see you next time.